So another one of the legendary fire-eater Democrats at the time is Zepheniah Kingsley. And like other Democrats in power, especially throughout the South, but not only in the South, Kingsley was a plantation owner, pro-slavery activist, nullificationist, all the fun things that followed the Democratic Party for most of its life at the time. And he really imagined a world that was a slave-utopia, kind of a paradise with paternalistic, loving masters and happy laboring slaves. And other Democrats at the time, John C. Calhoun, James Hammond, among others, they discussed this. But reading through Kingsley's different treatises and whatnot, he genuinely believed this was an attainable kind of utopian society. It wasn't just a means that he used to defend slavery. He seemed to really possess a legitimate belief that it was attainable, but only attainable through slavery. Now, where he differentiated himself from other Democrats at the time, and even from a lot of abolitionists at the time, was whereas the most popular public notion was that interbreeding between whites and blacks was detrimental. And of course, these laws and policies extended beyond the white-black paradigm. It included Mongols, as they referred to many then, Amerindians, actual from India, Indians, Chinese. There were a lot of laws at the time where whites were only free to marry and breed with whites, and then all non-whites were free to intermarry, and reproduce with really anyone they wanted to who wasn't white. So kind of a strange kind of deal there. But Kingsley was very different. He wrote very often detailing the advantages of kind of a Platonic selective breeding, but his was premised on race and not actual capabilities. So he adopted kind of the racial stereotypes of whites and blacks as a pretense for intentional breeding. His theory was that mulattoes, or whatever mixture that would then be produced, would possess the intellectual and cognitive advantages of their white parent and the presumed physical hardiness of the black parent. And so he really kind of unified three different systems of slavery theory, from the Aristotelian natural slavery kind of thing. In his world, the master and the slave benefited symbiotically from slavery, improving their own lives and society as a whole as well as a consequence. But he also kind of altered Plato and his idea of selective breeding. Whereas Plato premised his selective breeding methods purely on merit and capacity, Kingsley conflated that with race with the racial kind of determinism, this presumption of certain characteristics based on race. And he also incorporated the Ottoman kind of slave practice, not just in the selective breeding. The Ottomans were all about filling their harems with white-skinned, blue-eyed Circassian women. But he saw optimal stock as being the product of these unions, and he foresaw the use of slaves as the military force, much like the Ottomans had done, which is very contrary to the fears at the time of armed blacks and slaves and generally rising in rebellion and committing a giant race war like the Haitian Revolution. So he actually took the positive good argument and managed to expand it through selective breeding. But all of these utopian visions he had were predicated on the implication and application of slavery as an institution universally. And of course, part of his theories for the selective breeding were based on environmental determinism. So he also assumed then that these children produced from these interracial unions would be resistant to heat, resistant to malaria, capable of great physical labor, and they would possess all those characteristics, but without presumably lowered mental faculties that at this point many people still erroneously insisted was inherent in black so-called races. So he wrote, this is a very long title, but it is a treatise on the patriarchal or cooperative system of society as it exists in some governments and colonies in America and the United States under the name of slavery, with its necessity and advantages. So it's interesting, he doesn't just say, this is a treatise on slavery and how great it is. It's a treatise on the patriarchal or cooperative system of society. So slavery is a cooperative system of society. So of course this falls right back to our good friend George Fitzhugh, the honest socialist or the slave socialist, who saw socialism as the purest and most effective and efficient means of slavery, and vice versa as well. Socialism, he argued, was synonymous with slavery, and that's why he's kind of earned the nickname of the honest socialist as time has gone on. But so we see here in Kingsley, although he differentiates himself a bit in the use of blacks as military force and arguing for the superiority, actually, of mixed race offspring, he nonetheless aligns himself with the popular conventions of the day, with the Democrat insistence on the positive good, that blacks were only capable of enjoying life if they were lorded over by not just any white slave master, mind you, since 76% of whites did not own any slaves in the South by 1860, but by the right kind of white. So that would have been a good slogan, I think, for their political parties at the time, the right kind of white. So we see, of course, this reflection, this ruling class kind of oligarchy in the South, and that really formed the ideological basis for the Democrat Party going forward, which we'll explore and examine too once we get past the Civil War and get into the Reconstruction era. But he was, of course, a group of the legendary John C. Calhoun Fire Eaters, and he was, although we might scoff and kind of giggle a little bit at some of his ideas today for their absurdity, but at the time he was quoted and cited as an authoritative expert on these types of social issues and the perpetuation of slavery. Of course, maintaining that long human tradition of deep affection for confirmation bias. So if you think you've learned something useful here today, please subscribe, give a 5-star review, and I would invite you to visit 1787project.com.